Hello and welcome to the Sunbury Sloth Book Nook, a podcast about all things books, publishing and more. My name is Emma and today my guest is Tim Lewis. Tim is host of the Begin Self-Publishing podcast and is also an author. Now on with the show. Thank you for coming on the podcast today, Tim.
Hi, it's great for me to be on the show.
That's great. So first things first, obviously you do quite a lot of different sort of things. Can you sort of just do a rundown of what you generally do in your roles?
Well, yes, I do quite a few things. Basically, the background was that I started writing fiction books in about 2014. I think it was 2014. I used to work in IT, and then after my wife died, I decided to try and do different stuff. And I ended up writing 3 time travel books. So it's not actual fiction. I'm saying I'm not one of these people who's suddenly going to appear next week on the show. It's not genuine time travel fiction books. And then I wrote 3 fantasy novels in the years afterwards in NaNoWriMo. But parallel to that, I also been podcasting for the Begin Self-Publishing podcast. And I've done like 151 episodes of that show.
I'm a very junior in that sense.
Well, you seem to be doing from what I could tell on Twitter, you seem to be doing batch loading them, which is a good idea. Doing a lot of shows very quickly. Yeah. Not like me, where I'm now got to, I'll put a show out when I feel like it, kind of level. My last book was called Social Media Networking, and basically my progression in life was that I got so interested in trying to use social media to market books, something which I've still not mastered at all, to be fair, that I got very into the world of social media marketing and into social media in general. And even though I still can't really sell books on social media, I have had job opportunities, I've got speaking gigs from social media, and I interviewed 20 people who were talking about how they got basically opportunities, and some of them were quite big opportunities from social media. So that was my last book. I also run the indie author chat for the Alliance of Independent Authors, which is a Twitter chat. So on Tuesday nights, if you're in the UK, or Tuesday afternoons, if you're in the US, that basically features a guest each week who I ask questions to on Twitter, and they answer, and we all have a big discussion about whatever the topic is. So that's more or less the 101 things that I do.
Yeah, of course. It sounds like it's because of, say, you use the sort of self-author podcast and obviously with your writing, does a lot of it kind of cross over quite easily, or is it very sort of set differently?
Well, I mean, in many ways, I'm a terrible example of a writer in terms of an author. I basically seem to write about a book a year. Now, from a traditional publishing point of view, a book a year isn't actually that bad. But from a commercial self-publishing point of view, a book a year is too little, really. If you go to something like the 20 Books to 50K conference, which is one of the biggest self-publishing conferences in the world, the people who are being very successful on the self-publishing side, and people are successful in traditional publishing for this as well, but it's more so in self-publishing, are people who write long series of books in genre, usually genre fiction, so zombies or science fiction or romance, especially. Actually, romance is possibly fantasy. And they churn out basically a book a month, and it's almost like an industrial scale operation. So somebody like Michael Anderle, they have professional in-house editing staff in their sort of self-publishing. The most professional and successful self-publishers are almost publishers, really. They just have brought everything in-house into their own. They are just running the whole thing. So that's basically the way that success works at self-publishing. And I don't think I even answered the question there.
It's fine, don't worry. I mean, as I said, that was a really good sort of explanation of how far self-publishing is now. Because I guess traditional publishing is always going to have its audience and obviously its way, and obviously to get your book onto a shelf in a supermarket or into a bookstore or anywhere. But if you're self-publishing now, you can almost do everything yourself, so you have control of what your product is.
Yeah. Well, I mean, certainly the Alliance of Independent Authors. Most of the members of the Alliance of Independent, it's a non-profit that is basically the representative of self-publishers. But generally speaking, the people who work for that and the people who are the most active members is almost a school of self-publishing where these are authors who almost want a better quality book than what they would get if they were traditionally published. Because if you think about it, even if you are like J.K. Rowling or some of these big authors, the publishing house is going to spend the minimum amount of cost it can on the book. I mean, obviously, it's not going to do like a cheapo MS Paint design cover, but they're not going to be spending thousands of time. A lot of them are outsourcing the editing to people in the Philippines and other places, and depending on how big your traditional publishing house is, you're not necessarily going to get like this wonderful quality of book because they are taking the cost of the book. I mean, this is the fundamental difference between traditional publishing and self-publishing is that the traditional publisher, if they are a decent one, will take the cost of creating and editing, cover design, all of the ancillary costs of the book, and they will pay for that. And then you will get paid in advance on your royalties, and your royalties are considerably lower than they would be as a self-publisher. So fundamentally, it's a risk question. If you're self-publishing the book, even if you're using an assisted publishing service, so I think it's Troubadour. I can never remember if it's Troubadour or Matador Books. Is the one of them?
Matador, I think I've bumped into them at London Book Fair, and I know that they do self-publishing. If I'm right, yeah, I know that they're one of the sort of.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's Troubadour. Troubadour's like either Troubadour or Matador. One of those two is the other company's self-publishing arm, and they do a very professional job in terms of assisted publishing. So that is where you're not doing anything. So you are self-publishing because you're funding it, but you're just paying Troubadour, and they will find the editors and the cover design and stuff for you. That's not really true. That's the kind of in-between model. I wouldn't say hybrid because hybrid's got different terminology in the UK.
Yeah.
Hybrid talks about people who are both self-published and traditionally published. But I call it assisted publishing, is that middle area.
Yeah.
So, but a self-publisher, you are basically the project manager of the project and you are paying for everything yourself. But the reward is that you will get much higher royalties. Well, they're not even royalties, they are actual revenue from the book, but they're called royalties. So, for example, for an ebook in the US, if your book is over $2.99 and under $9.99, you'll be paid 70% royalties for each sale of that book. Now, I don't know exactly how much a traditional author would get for an ebook, but I would suspect 20% would be the maximum they would get. And obviously, because their money comes out of an advance, they don't get any of those royalties until they've earned back their advance. So it's that's another thing to bear in mind with traditional publisher. The advance is an advance. It's not just a payment. You don't get paid royalties instantly after you got the advance. You have to earn the advance back before you get any extra money back as a traditional publisher.
Yeah, I like the middle idea because it kind of means that sometimes some of the pressure's taken off, but as I said, you've still got control. I mean, I spoke to a lovely travel blogger who's Alicia Ford, and she said that she self-published her book and she had so much control over the marketing of it and obviously everything like that, and that was what worked for her. But for some people it might not be an option for them, so I guess it's truly up to the person, and they feel like that book they want to get it published traditionally, or they want to go for it themselves. Some people just go straight into self-publishing, don't they?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's what I did. As soon as I found out the option was available, that was what I wanted to do. Now, You were saying about bookstore distribution. It is possible, and there are self-publishers who have their books in bookstores and even supermarkets. Now, the reason why traditional publishers have an advantage in bookstore is just basically the economics of how bookstore distribution works. So, if you are a self-publisher and you want to make your book available as a paperback to be sold on Amazon, for example, that is fairly straightforward, and there isn't really any advantage that a big company has in that process, because you go onto the KDP interface, it's Kindle Direct Publishing, you upload your PDF file that you've created with the inside of your book thing, and then your book is available on Amazon. Basically, that is how it works with a paperback on Amazon. And an ebook is an EPUB file, which is a similar file. Now, if you want your book to be available in a bookstore, you can use Amazon to do that, but generally speaking, most of the advices don't, because how bookstores work is it's a bit strange actually, but it's kind of the traditional way. So usually books are sold on what's called a sale and return basis. So I'd usually use a service like Ingram Spark, or I would go to a print run and actually print off a load of copies. And then I would have to go to a bookstore or a bookstore chain and then get them to order the book. They will order the book on a sale and return basis, usually at a steep discount. So typically those discounts are 50% of the price of the book. And that 50% is not including the print costs of the book. So if you've got a $10 paperback book and you want that to be available in bookstores, you have to think of it as like a $5 book, because you've already given at least, it's usually 50 or 55% of the book you give to the bookstore if they sell it. If they don't sell it, they can return the book. So it's actually, the margins are so tight on bookstore distribution that having the advantage of scale, having a team of salesmen to go around bookstores or bookstore chains, trying to offer them, get them to actually buy your book and order it in, that helps a lot. And being able to do print runs. So if you do print on demand, which is the biggest thing in terms of paperback that has changed self-publishing in the last 20 years or so, then it's quite expensive to print a book and then give away half the value of the book and then possibly have them return if it doesn't sell, because you'll take the cost, or you'll take the hit of the book, because you won't be. They generally incinerate or destroy books that aren't sold, which is environmentally is a bit dodgy, but that's how the bookstore works. So there is an advantage for a traditional publisher in terms of going to bookstore distributions, but the margins are so low compared to online sales or ebooks that from a financial point of view, it doesn't really make much difference. So self-publishing is kind of, if you're confident in your book and you're willing to take the cost and you're willing to do all the organisation, then you will get a much bigger return than if you go the traditional publishing route. On the other hand, if it's about status and it's about getting your book into lots of bookstores, then traditional publishing might well be the way that you want to go. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, of course. I mean, that's weird, because I was going to start saying about POD, print on demand, because obviously in the last few years they've talked about how big print on demand is now, so you don't end up having the excess books lying around. I mean, I was first made aware of it actually on my course. So when I was writing an essay, I started researching into POD, and it is huge. So most sort of even distribution centres that I know or have heard of have actually started doing POD. So or printers have started specifically doing POD. Do you think that is a definite way forward, that most sort of printers will start now adapting to POD, or do you think there's still I know we sort of talked about traditional print runs, but do you think that it's sort of the way forward with it?
Well, I mean, the biggest one, there are loads of print on demand things. As I say, local printers are doing that now because they can. I mean, I probably should backtrack to anybody who doesn't know what print on demand is. The way print on demand works is I order a book and on say on Amazon, so it used to be called Create Space, but it's now part of KDP. I order one of my books on Amazon as a paperback. When I do that, Amazon sends a little single signal to their printers, who prints off one copy of the book. Or if I order two, they print off two copies of the book. So it literally is, you print as soon as it's sold. When the traditional model used to be that you would print a print run. Now, it's still cheaper per unit of book to do a print run than it is to do print on demand. But print on demand used to be virtually impossible. People couldn't do it. It was like hideously expensive. But now the cost is possibly like something like 20 to 50% more. So, I mean, it's reasonable, because holding stock is expensive. If you've got to have a whole pile of books in your garage, and then you've got to send them off to Amazon each time it's been ordered, that's a lot of hassle. You could do it yourself, but it's like, that was what put people off doing self-publishing, like in the 1980s and things like that. People did self-publish books. There's lots of quite famous books over the years, I'm struggling to remember now, that were actually, I think a lot of Charles Dickens stuff was self-published. He actually published it himself. But yeah, I mean, print on demand makes that a lot easier because you're not holding stock, and holding stock of any product is, you're tying up money, and it's basically the stock, and it's like, that's not a great model in business, really.
Yeah, of course. So kind of like moving away from the self-publishing stuff, and it is kind of linked. With your writing,
Yeah.
obviously when you first began writing, did you find it easy to get sort of words on paper, or did you just have to plan any novels that you started writing?
Well, I mean, I read a book called Write, Publish, Repeat when I was in my notice period, which was by the people who run the Self-Publishing podcast, actually. Well, I think it's changed its name to some other podcast now, or they're not running it or something. And something that book said that made me really help me with writing and actually got me to finish a book for the first time was writing a plan and then writing the book as fast as possible. Now, obviously, how anybody does writing and how they do it is a very personal thing. But for me, that helped so much. So for my first, it was supposed to be a time travel novel, actually, but it ended up being a novella because I wrote the book too quickly. But I planned out what was going to happen in the story beforehand. And then I literally did just, don't worry about like grammar. Don't go back rereading and editing as you're going. Just finish the first draft as quickly as possible.
I have to admit, I've definitely done that with assignments. I've definitely gone and edited as I've gone, and it's probably been the worst decision I've done.
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, I tell this. I mean, on my podcast now, the format, I used to interview people like this kind of show and do like experts, but now the last 20 episodes or so, I've been taking people through and basically following people, helping them to self-publish their books. And a lot of the shows are about writing. And if you think about it, there is an awful lot to be said for writing as fast as possible your first draft. Because if you say you think, I'm going to write for half an hour a day, once a month. No, I'm going to write for, well, let's say half an hour a day, but I'm going to take a week off. The trouble with like short little bits of inconsistent time on a book is that you end up joining up. You have to reread what you read before, get it in your mind. Then you're very tempted to go and edit what you wrote before. And it is a really unproductive way of writing. Being able to finish a first draft in ideally like a week or something like that just makes the book so much better quality because you haven't got those joins. Because if you start a book and then you put it down for a week or a month, you forget what you wrote.
Yeah.
And then you have to go back and you try and and now obviously if you've got a very strong plan for the book, that helps a lot. But there is a lot to be said for I spend all my time on the plans. So I could spend like 9 months writing a plan for a book. And then like I write the book. I've written the three fantasy books I wrote. I wrote all of them in NaNoWriMo. Do you know what NaNoWriMo is?
No, I don't.
It's the it's an American thing. So hence the generic name, even though it's National Novel Writing Month. It's basically a challenge that started in the US, where in November people try and write 50,000 words. So that is what NaNoWriMo is. There's like probably about 150,000 people that do it every year. So that's NaNoWriMo, NaNoWriMo. And it's great because you go and like you've got a little tracker thing for how writing your words, and you can go to meetups with other people, and they're all trying to write their novel in the month. So I'd spend like 9 months writing the plan, or I wouldn't actually spend 9 months, but I'd be ruminating in my head what the plan is going to be for the book, fundamental plan for the book. Then create the plan, and then in NaNoWriMo or on my own, I would just write the book as fast as possible. And it does help with the quality of the book because you keep everything in your head, and basically that book is all that you're like working on. You remember the details of things, but if you're just doing your book in dribs and drabs, and then you've got all these joins and bits where you suddenly resurrect somebody who's died earlier on because you forgot that you killed them off, or like all sorts of inconsistencies appear, or like you go back and you try and edit what you think you have to reread it, and then you think, well, I don't like that, so I'm going to change that, and you end up editing. And yeah, so that's the process that I like: create a plan and then write the book.
Yeah, of
Um,
course.
that said, my last book I did a totally different way, but that's kind of after saying this. But for fiction, anyway, that's the way I like to write the book.
Yeah, of course. So obviously, I do ask a lot of writers who come on the podcast this. If there's one piece of advice you could sort of give to someone who's beginning writing, regardless of what they're doing, or they want to get a novel published or anything, what would you say to those people?
Well, I've given this advice on other podcasts and other things. I would say to people, and I should take this myself, take this advice myself in other areas. Start small. So don't write like 200,000 word novel as your first book. Write a novella or write a short novel or something like that, or write a short book. And also don't write, unless you think you're only ever going to write one book, don't write your most special, darling, your best story idea. Don't write that as your first book. Write something that's you're not as bothered about. Because the trouble is, if you've got like some great story that you think is like your best idea ever, you don't really want to be doing that as your first book because you'll be very hurt by criticism of it. You won't have necessarily have the writing skill to write that book yet, and you're better off to write your darling book or your sort of your big the book that you really as a passion project you want to write. You'd be way better doing that when you're more comfortable with the writing and self-publishing process or pitching process, whatever route you want to go down. So I would say, yeah, start off with a smaller project, certainly with self-publishing, because everything's cheaper apart from cover design. Covers cost the same whatever length the book is, but editing's going to be cheaper for a shorter book. Even if you do a lot of the editing work yourself, it's going to be less time because it's shorter. And that would be my advice to writers: start with something short and get that done. Get used to the process. I mean, there's the writing craft, but a lot of it is the process of actually completing something and finishing it and learning that. And you'll improve as time goes on as you get better at the process of writing.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you very much. And finally, I kind of ask every single one of my guests this question. Is there a book that you've read recently that you'd like to recommend?
I've read recently.
Or anything that you'd like to recommend say you've read a month ago.
Yeah, I was just trying to think. There was one that I listened to the audiobook recently, which was quite good, but it's got expletive in the title, so I was thinking maybe I don't want to say that one. Hang on. Just getting my phone out so I can look at my audiobooks. I generally listen to audio rather than read books now.
Yeah.
I've got people keep giving me books because as soon as you become mildly successful as a podcaster, you get freebies. So you've got that to look forward to.
I've got lots of books I picked up from sort of publishers when I was doing internships, and it's been quite good because I'm still making my way through those. Because a couple of years ago I did one at Penguin, and I got a load of books from Penguin. I'm still slowly making my way through half of those, so it's been pretty good. So still picking up books though from the local shops, which is really, really bad. But I've got course books as well, so you're always busy reading.
Well, I'm going to recommend a book that hasn't got an expletive in the title, which is Mark Schaefer's Marketing Rebellion book. Mark Schaefer's actually a really nice guy. He's like a marketing professor from Rutgers University in the US, and he's quite big on the speaking circuit. But the whole thing about that book is he's talking about how marketing is moving away from the traditional kind of advertising approach into being very much more word of mouth based. I'm not sure necessarily marketing is in exactly the position that Mark says it is in that book, but that is the way things are going. So he makes the example of this coming to somebody's house and finding this very expensive locally made soap brand, and he's like, well, why didn't you just buy a cheaper sort of national? And they were like, well, we know the people who made this soap brand. We know they made it with love, and that's why we buy it. And that's kind of his way, that he's all about everything's going to be word of mouth recommendations from people because of the way the internet and society is changing. So it's a very interesting book, Marketing Rebellion, by Mark Schaefer.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, well, it was my pleasure to be interviewed.
You're very welcome. All right, thank you very much. Bye.
Thanks.
That's it for this week's episode. Thanks for listening. You can follow Tim on Twitter at Stoneham Press. If you'd like to get involved with the podcast, you can get in touch through Twitter at NovelM16 and use the hashtag Slothcast, or you can send me an email at slumberyslothbooknook@gmail.com. You can always find our podcast on our YouTube channel, Slumberous Sloth Book Nook, or you can download it from Podbean and Apple Podcasts for an on-the-go experience. See you next week. Bye.